Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Ashtoons Storytime, this time number 4. And as I am taking this video, it's a little bit after 7 o'clock in the afternoon on Wednesday, August the 2nd, 2023, and I am standing in Mount Baldy State Park in Indiana. It's part of the famous Indiana dunes, and you can see them right there. And I say famous because these dunes are not part of a beach. They're not part of the ocean at all. Instead, they are part of the Great Lakes. In the case of Mount Baldy, Lake Michigan, to be exact. And what I am leaning against is this warning sign right here, telling you to keep off the dunes. Now, across the top, it's saying to preserve their fragile dune system. But these are just giant piles of sand. Why are you not allowed to climb up them? What is the danger of it? And there are a lot of the Indiana dunes that you are allowed to climb. But here at Mount Baldy, they have these signs out. You are not allowed to climb these dunes. Now, the true reason why this sign is here is the source of today's story. Now, today's story is going to be delving once again into the miraculous. So, for you non-believers out there, the ones that get offended by religious and, references to things like that, you might want to tune out because this one's going to get offensive to you. All right, the true reason why this sign is here. Let's get into it. Well, first off, these are not your regular dunes. They are what I've heard described as living dunes. They're made from a very fine, very dry sand that has no cactus, no weeds, no grass growing on them, any kind of root system at all to anchor them into place. And so over a period of time, the wind can blow them and they can move. I'm not sure exactly how many feet per year or even if it's a consistent number of feet per year. But I do know that they can and they do move. That's part of the reason why this fence is made out of broom handles that have been pounded into the sand and polypropylene rope. And even the warning sign is just pounded into the ground and the sign is held in place by zip ties. These are all very temporary things meant to be able to be pulled up and moved as the dune itself moves. And so sometimes in their moving, they can engulf an entire tree. Even right here within a viewing distance of the parking lot, just up the dune a little way, you can see it happening. Right there is a tree that has been mostly engulfed by the living dune. And it has already died. There's no leaves on it. So either before it's engulfed by the dune or in the process, it dies. And then the possibility is there for the tree to completely disintegrate and leave a hollow shaft. And sometimes that hollow shaft can be lurking just a little ways underneath the surface of the sand, like a naturally occurring Viet Cong trap, but one that is surrounded by very fine sand that can collapse in on itself, making kind of a trap that would leave the Viet Cong jealous. But this was a possibility that the Park Service hadn't even thought of at the time, didn't know was possible. And certainly a lot of families that were going to go climb on these dunes didn't know it was possible. That brings us to the next part of the story. The time is the middle of summer, the middle of July in 2013. That would have made it 10 years ago as of last month. Enter all-American Christian salt-of-the-earth family of 6 from Sterling, Illinois, the Woessner family, that decided to take advantage of the long weekend and go on out to Mount Baldy to do some camping with some family friends, and then during the day to go run up and down the dunes, do some hiking, and basically just have some nice, good quality family time. Well, at some point during that day, the youngest of the 4 kids, little 6-year-old Nathan, fell down into one of these sinkhole hollow shafts. And luckily his friend was coming up behind him and saw him disappear into the sand and was able to go get his dad's attention, and they ran back to the top of the hole. And for a moment, they could see him and they could hear him, and they were trying to keep him calm, but of course he's a little panicked and worked up, that they were reassuring him that they were going to do everything they could to get down to him and for him to just be patient. But it was only moments, and that dry, fine sand around the top of the hole collapsed, and that's when panic set in. Now, digging a hole in dry sand is particularly difficult, and you can kind of see why right here, just with my hand. Now, we had a little bit of a rain recently, so this is a little damp, so it might not be a good demonstration, but you can see how this happens, where it's like as you claw away from it, this other sand just falls right back into its place. So to get any kind of depth to it, you've just got to keep excavating further out and further out and further out, and it just keeps falling right back in. It's like a sarlacc pit. It's like trying to dig to the bottom where you can see the bottom of a pool, but the pool is full of nerds, or or marbles or something. That's the kind of frustration they were fighting against that day. And Indiana Dunes themselves are a lot more fine sand than most beaches. So much so that the Ball Glass Company actually carted away tons of this stuff for a long time because they understood the fine values of the sand at the Indiana Dunes. So you can just imagine that day. And the dad described the sand as unforgiving. The frustration of clawing at it first with your hands, and then some people bring you some hand tools, and you're trying with that, but it just keeps on falling back down in, and so eventually you switch to the hand tools and then to the heavy machinery, and the time keeps passing on, and you're desperate and panically trying to get to your little 6-year-old son stuck somewhere down underneath that sand. To put it in perspective, Nathan was stuck 11 feet down, and there was no way for them to know if he had maybe closed his arms up and formed himself a little air pocket whenever the sand collapsed, or if maybe there was a naturally forming air pocket in there. All they could do was try to get to him and at the same time pray. And they prayed very, very hard. And local news got a hold of the story. Helicopters were flying over. It was an all-hands-on-deck. Rescue teams rushed to the site. As many people as possible were digging, and eventually they realized that the hand tools are not going to be enough. So they brought in excavators, and in a total of 3 excavators before they finally got to the depth of 11 feet. But by that point, it had been almost 3 hours. And so most of the rescuers had given up hope of finding him alive, and they had just decided at that point it was just a recovery mission. They were just trying to recover a body. But once they got to the right depth, it was like he had disappeared. They lost track of where the top of the hole had started and where they were trying to get to. And so they went through a grid pattern of taking a metal pole and just gently poking it into the sand to try to find where he was. And once they found where he was, they got the excavator to do a very gentle, very slow dig for those last few feet before they finally found him and they pulled him out of the sand. And it did not look good. His body was cold, was limp, he was completely unconscious. Most people on site believed that he was deceased, he was gone. But they rushed him to the paramedics and got him on board the ambulance anyway and started rushing him to the hospital. And the paramedics inside the ambulance were having a hard time even finding any vitals. But one of them noticed that he had a big cut on his face that was bleeding. The blood was moving. He was bleeding, and it was fresh oxygenated blood. This was actually a good sign. There's no other way for oxygen to get into blood unless there are some vitals there. So, against all odds, it looked like he was actually still alive. So they resuscitated him and did their work on him as best they could. When they got him to the hospital, they got him hooked up to life support systems, which he actually started to respond to. His vitals came back, and he was in critical condition. But he was alive. He was alive, and the amount of time that he was under that sand was over 3 hours. The only way I can describe that in itself is a miracle. To the point where the excavator operator that dug those last few feet and before they got him out of there was actually converted to Christianity and was baptized that night because he knew that there was no other way that a kid can survive under sand for over 3 hours unless there was some kind of miraculous divine intervention. So the doctor was finally able to walk out to the waiting room where his very scared and prayerful parents that had been contacting family and friends, and they had been sending up prayers for little Nathan. And he was able to look at them and say the 2 words that they had been waiting and hoping to hear for hours. And those 2 words were, "He's alive." Could you imagine being that parent? How much gratitude would be filling your heart at that time. God gave him back to those parents. Now, to add to the miraculous nature of his rescue in general, his recovery was also kind of miraculous, because a lot of the doctors thought that he was going to have some kind of permanent damage as a result of this, either brain damage from being cut off from the air for so long, or to his eyes or lungs from having so much sand in there, or even some kind of mental trauma damage. But none of that turned out to be true. He was in the hospital for only about 2 weeks, and he did have to undergo some kind of complicated procedures to remove the sand from his eyes and from his lungs. But after those 2 weeks, he was able to be discharged and go on home. And the local news actually came back a year later when he was 7 to check up on him and see how he was doing. And so I was able to also see some video of him when he was 7, and he was just out playing on the playground and swinging on swings and running around like a normal 7-year-old. This is the way he looks today. He's 16 now, of course, a high schooler, and he's playing high school basketball and doesn't even remember being stuck under the sand. He says that he remembers going to Mount Baldy with his family that day, and the next thing he remembers is waking up in the hospital. So even the memory of the whole traumatic thing is completely gone from Nathan. And I really don't know any other way that you could see that whole situation as anything other than a miracle. His, against all odds, rescue and recovery. That is going to do it for today's story. Guys, I hope you have enjoyed this. But while I've got your attention, and before I let you go, I'm going to read you a passage from the greatest book to ever grace the public domain. This time, the New World Translation, because I do like the way that it flows. This time I'm going to be reading from the book of Acts. Yeah, Pentecostal guy reading from the book of Acts. Shocker, right? This time we're going with chapter 12, verses 5 through 7. Consequently, Peter was being kept in prison, but prayer to God for him was being carried on intensely by the congregation. Now when Herod was about to produce him, that night Peter was sleeping bound with 2 chains between 2 soldiers, and guards before the door were keeping the prison. But look, Jehovah's angel stood by, and a light shone in the prison cell. Striking Peter on the side, he roused him, saying, "Rise quickly," and his chains fell off his hands. Do you feel like you're in prison between 2 soldiers and chained to each one, and soldiers at the door? You feel like you're under tons of sand? You feel trapped? Well, there is power in prayer. There is power in the intense, fervent prayer of the righteous man, as is said in the scripture. No matter where you are in life or what you have done, don't forget that as long as you are still breathing, there is still time to get your heart right with God. UPCI.org is a good place to start. that's going to be it for this one, guys. Don't forget to give me the good old thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video around. Just watching this video is a good thank you to me. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you guys getting to this point, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.